I am very, very thrilled to welcome all of you here today at the Beyond GDP Forum. My name is Stephanie. I'll be your Master of Ceremony today. And a little note, also the new Deputy CEO at B-Lab Switzerland. Please, if ever you would like to connect, I am based in Zurich, so it might be a bit closer for some of you. Just reach out, and I promise I can offer one of the best coffees you've tasted. So, why am I thrilled? I'm thrilled because this room is filled up with leaders from academia, from business, from civil society, and from government. And we all here agree on three things. We agree that the stability of our economy is dependent on the health of our planet. We all here agree that GDP is not enough to measure progress. And with your participation and your presence here today with us, you also have agreed and expressed your interest and willingness to help us co-create a solution for this. Today's event consists of three parts. We are first going to share a contextualization of why we believe this initiative is crucial and necessary. It will then be followed by a panel discussion by some of our esteemed participants here, leaders from business, academia, and civil society, and government. Before we get to the third part, which is the consultation, which we're going to frame in table discussion formats. So this is why you find yourself surrounded with people on your table. So first off, the first person I would like to invite to join me here on stage is André Hoffmann. I have to admit that every single time it's getting a bit more complicated to introduce you, because the more I read about you, the more I'm getting nervous. So I'm warning you, probably next time I'm going to do the same as everyone else, which is I'm going to try and get a selfie with you in your book, because you're not only the co-founder of Intent, chairman at Roche, but also a very vocal business leader advocating for the importance of the environment. So thank you very much for sharing your opening remarks for today's forum.
Should I take the microphone? Can you hear me? Yeah. Well, Stefan just spoke about nervosity. I'm even more nervous. It's really quite exciting to see that we are able, on the first day in Davos, to attract as many people to a subject as what's the word? Uninspiring as GDP. I mean, GDP is a the economist who actually devised GDP, he was called Kuznets, and he advised the American government about 200 years ago, or 150 years ago. And he said, this is a very interesting way to look at the economy because it talks about growth, but it talks about nothing else. So please don't use it. So anyway, we have used it. We have made it the reference number we need to use, and we look constantly at growth of the economy, completely disregarding all the negative sides that it brings about, the impact it is having on the social, the natural, and the human capital. Now, the fact that we have all these measurements of the economy is something that should guide our decisions when we take decisions about asset allocation of our businesses. And at the moment, we really don't. We only look at growth. It's like if you look at the value of something, the profit and loss dimension without looking at the content of what actually is there. So you can sell the planet in order to buy growth, and that's what's been happening. So here we have an opportunity to launch a new measurement, and the fact that we have people standing in the door trying to come in, and we have a waiting list longer than I can remember, it shows that we are touching a raw nerve. We are touching a part of society which are really important in the way we're going to go forward. Now, Switzerland has been, as a nation, extremely apt at sort of sensing the wind into which these directions are going Oh, that's a mixed metaphor, sorry. And it's important that we should capture this and that we bring that forward. So absolute congratulations to Jonathan and his team to have been able to bring that all together, because now we're going to be here starting to talk about CP. Now, CP is the Swiss Index, Swiss Impact Performance Index. Saying, you see the old habits, performance and prosperity. Anyway, rather than going into the technical explanation, which, as you can see, I'm not particularly able to do, I just wanted to yet again enthusiastically support this initiative. I'm delighted that we can do that here at the SDG tent. The organization sponsoring all this is called Intent. It's something my wife and I have started. We are here as guests of the SDG tent, but as of next year, we will be actually taking over the whole management of it, so that we can continue to create these kinds of events which are supposed to accelerate our move towards this sustainable prosperity. And the sustainable prosperity, as we all know, has to be inclusive, but that's going to be the debate of another day, but the CP will now allow us to look at prosperity in a sustainable manner here in Switzerland. And thank you very much to all of you to come. Very much looking forward to the result of our conversation. And now, Stephanie, who do I give the microphone back to? To you. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much, André. So the next person also needs almost no introduction, which is Jonathan Norman, one of the co-founders from B-Lab Europe and the founder and CEO from B-Lab Switzerland.
Thank you very much. Nervosity, yes. Excitement, really. When I see the crowd, when I see how much of you have been before today raising question about what does it all about going beyond GDP? What does mean prosperity? What is the role of Switzerland? A lot of questions. So let me start by welcoming first and Your Excellencies, dear honored guests, dear partners, dear representative of the government, a warm welcome being with us today. I'd like to make a little special thanks to André and Rosalie for their outstanding continual engagement and for hosting us today. And I'm thrilled to address to you today here, but also we have a live stream. We didn't mention that, right? We have a live stream, so we have an online community following up the first part of the session today. And so really thrilled to address you today at the Go Beyond GDP Forum, first session, and especially in such turbulent time, right? Knowing what's going to happen at the Capitol today. Oh, let's be a bit provocative, right? That's the tone that we set for the day. And so this gathering of minds and leaders really will bring and share this common vision of what means sustainability and prosperity, and obviously prosperous future that goes also beyond Switzerland, knowing how Switzerland is designed, and I will come back on that. So today's forum is all about a simple fact. Information, if we have the right information, and if we don't have the right information, we cannot act. That's all it will be about. And it questions also the whatever figure or metrics we use are ways to see the world, right? And so, and if so, which one are there? What are the figures and which one we are following, right? And that's what we want to bring here today, not just to talk about it, but really to get your input, get your feedback, get views from different leaders, from various communities, from the businesses, from civil society, from government, obviously. So that's also bring me to just take a moment to brace and think about the immense cost of our inaction today. We're talking about more than 25 trillion annually that cost the biodiversity loss. That's the annual cost of biodiversity loss, 25 trillion. It's a quarter of the global GDP. Let's play a little bit with numbers, guys. We need to think about it. And you know, the financial and social stakes are far greater than we often realize. And so think also about the climate change that is projected today to slash 7% of corporate earnings annually by 2035. So this call for businesses, this isn't just environmental issue. This is long-term viability and profitability. So there is really a business case around that. I have to share today here during the WEF week, obviously, you know, this year again, the Global Risk Report reaffirmed that aside of inequality, aside of technological risk, misinformation, or interstate conflict, the most important structural risks are environmental by nature in a long 10 years view. So that's really something that we need to get, and there is no doubt that this should be the focus of today's action and tomorrow, right? And so we must ask ourselves really how we can transform and move from reactive measure to really proactive solution. That's really the call of today, and even more on those, as I mentioned, turbulent time that we are living. And that's bring me to hold and just clarify the role of Switzerland, because we are in Davos, we are doing the WEF week, it's an international setup, but let's talk about Switzerland and the unique role that holds Switzerland and the significant opportunity also to globally lead decarbonization, knowing that we oversee operation and result that really you know, bring, we know, 6 to 9 times our domestic emission. And the financial flow, I would say the broad economic and financial flow that we operate around Switzerland and originating from Switzerland contribute to emissions that are 40 to 80 times our domestic total. We have an accountability, and with accountability comes action, you know, and leadership. And that's what we believe, that even Switzerland is a very small country, geographically speaking, there is a really need for, you know, having this management of the outsized impact that Switzerland have across economic and financial activity. So let's go into the topic. Why go beyond GDP? We know that numerous initiatives have been initiated. This is not a new topic, but why now? Why today? And let's acknowledge that while GDP has been as a, you know, a cornerstone of economic measurement during decades, it fails really to capture the quality of what we define as growth or its broader impact. Narrative is important. Why I mention how we define growth. We just need to get aligned. We just need to align ourselves on a new narrative. And then what happened? We change the externalities. That's really something that we need you, because this narrative needs to be translated on a sector specific. This narrative needs to be translated for policy development. This narrative needs to be developed with investors, and more than ever, with citizens and consumers. So we believe that while still is missing a comprehensive approach, and today in the panel you will discover and get fantastic inputs around initiatives that are putting out those Go Beyond GDP metrics and indicators, we believe that there is really a call now that needs to integrate those insights and obviously drive actionable change, as I mentioned. And this is really, for me, the key element of being here today. We will talk, we will act, and we want to follow up those actionable solutions with you. And not to mention, many of projects exist in Switzerland. We have done a mapping around all existing initiatives, piece and beat, focusing on green GDP, focusing on well-being, on social, behavioral element, on diversity. It's time for Switzerland, in this global leadership role, to get people together, to get all institutional organizations together to reduce the lack of synchronicity. Say it differently, to tackle what I see as being active for the past 20 years in Switzerland, leading sustainability topic, the fragmentation issues between our organization, between our various stakeholders from business, community, civil society, policymaker. That's what we want to address, and that's why we've designed this initiative, the Swiss Impact and Prosperity Initiative, codename CP. Easy to remember, right? Make me think about a little dog. I don't know why, but yeah, I'm not a comms guy, as you know. So no, you know, we have designed this initiative, and it's really built around existing framework while addressing their gaps, simply said. So what I really like you to capture here is that this initiative, this new initiative, really aims to redefine success by reconciling the four capital that André mentioned: human, nature, social, and economic capital. Not to redefine, rethink, reshape, reconcile. And that's, again, here a narrative element. When you try to reconcile, you engage a very different process than when you try to redefine or to change or to rethink, right? You need to think about the interests of each other. You need to get together. You need to engage of those dialogue. And that's what the platform will do across various sectors, topic in Switzerland. And that's, don't want to share too much at the moment, but that's, you know, the idea of assessing Switzerland prosperity and accountability by considering those social and environmental factors in a very some way. And what we will want to address is also how Switzerland take into account the externalities alongside of traditional economic performance metric. That's it's all about. Nothing new under the sun. What is new? It's to have a platform, it's to have those collaboration, it's to have a joint plan and deliver it. It's damn needed. Sorry for my words, but it's really needed at the moment, more than ever. So yeah, this initiative is not just about measurement, obviously. As I mentioned, it's really also around to overcome the fragmentation efforts and also, for me, the narrative element. I won't to go too much in detail, but let's think about, you know, how we can mobilize those community, businesses, civil society today, and more than everything, think about the ambition that requires such collaboration and obviously the commitment that goes with. So I'm looking forward to the input that you will gather today, that we will gather today. So let's move from I and you to us today, and hopefully it will allow us to really make this open, co-created initiative a success. I thank you very much, and I hand over to you, Stephanie, right? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. So the next person I would like to introduce is an award-winning political economy expert, and since September 2024, also the president of IMD. So David has very much focused with his work on equipping leaders on how to navigate the complexities at the intersection of politics and business. More so, really, to help them address the challenges such as economic nationalism, diverse stakeholder demands, but also within the contentious political landscape. So, David. You have here your microphone.
Thank you, Stephanie, and welcome everyone. When I see this picture, I notice how quickly I'm aging in this new role of just 4 months. It's an absolute pleasure to be with you. Thank you, André, Rosalie, Intent, BLAP, many of the contributors here for the opportunity. I don't have slides, so I don't think I need this one. Thank you so much. It's rare for me. I usually show up with a lot of slides, but not today. So I lead IMD. We're a global business school headquartered in Lausanne, beautiful Lausanne, but we work with leaders and organizations around the world to help them transform towards that goal that we all share of a more prosperous, sustainable, and inclusive world. And among business schools, we pride ourselves in being forward-looking, which is why this question before us, how do we actually think about measurement of our economic activity differently, is very, very exciting. I will put in a little plug for our forward-looking thought leadership. You have a little card in front of you that gives you access to our knowledge hub, and we'd love to get your feedback on some of the ideas that we share, of course on sustainability, but also other topics through that. Let me try to frame this session by telling you a little bit about my experience in the classrooms. I'm a teacher before anything else, and I've been teaching, as Stephanie said, for a long time at this nexus of business and politics, and I teach a course in our MBA program. Now, you need to understand at IMD, sustainability is really important. We reorganized our curriculum a number of years ago around sustainability, and our participants who come to our program know that sustainability is central. We kicked off the program just a couple of days ago with an address by Peter Bakker, the CEO of the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, who made very effectively the case that prosperity and sustainability go together. So our students know this, and then I teach them a course on business and society, and I kick off the course with a little simulation. I don't tell them a whole lot about the course, but we play a game, and in groups they need to manage a plant, and they have to make decisions every single round about whether they discharge pollution from their plant into a lake or whether they treat that discharge and therefore avoid that pollution. And they quickly find out that by discharging, they make more money. And as you can imagine, what ends up happening is they start competing with one another and who can make the most money, and they start discharging, and the lake gets worse and worse and worse. And they sort of do understand that that impacts their earnings because their returns actually start declining, but they can't really get out of this. And what is powerful about this lesson is that they're experiencing for the first time a fundamental economic concept that Jonathan mentioned that is called negative externalities. In my view, one of the most important economic concepts that is really, really poorly understood. What happens in this game is not that good people suddenly turn out to be bad people, or that we had all kinds of admissions errors and we have a group of sort of eco-terrorists in the program. What ends up happening is that they're getting bad information because the cost that they're imposing on the community is not factored in to the information they receive. That's the very idea of a negative externality, right? That the private cost is different from the social cost. And what ends up happening is you make bad decisions. If you don't receive proper information about the impact of your actions, you make bad decisions. And then the rest of the course is about how do we unpack this? What are some of the tools that are available that can actually align private and public benefit? Now, what is nice about doing this with the simulation is we can actually run a parallel simulation and see what happens when people receive the correct information where the cost is included. And of course, the students are stunned to see that they could have made much more money individually and collectively if they had properly taken care of the environment. And of course, it's a simple game and it has a lot of assumptions, but I think it's a pretty powerful metaphor for the situation that we find ourselves in. We are optimizing based on incomplete information. And so as we're growing our profits, as André said before, we're throwing costs onto society. And that is irresponsible, but it's also irrational because we could be doing better, all of us individually and collectively, if we had the best information. So of course, there have been efforts over the last several decades, in fact, to provide more non-financial information to investors, but also to managers to make better decisions. And many of you are much more familiar with these various standards and protocols and the role that they play in shaping decision-making by senior executives, in shaping decision-making, of course, all by investors as well. But many of these standards, and they're increasingly being mandated. Of course, the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive in the EU makes that a requirement now, despite the fact that the German government seems to be trying to wiggle out of the commitments previously made. These disclosures are mandatory in many countries now around the world, but they operate at the company level. We don't have the equivalent at the economy level to actually elevate this up, and this is why this conversation is so important. What does that look like in practice? I'll share just one example with you. My colleague Jean-Pierre Dantin is here, who is one of the founders of something that is called Enterprise for Society, E4S. It's a collaboration among the École Polytechnique Fédérale de Lausanne, EPFL, one of the best engineering schools in the world, the University of Lausanne, one of the leading Swiss institutions. We have both of their leaders here, and IMD. And we work together, bringing our faculty together, bringing our networks together, bringing our students together to think about how to align better business and markets with the goals or the needs of people and planet. And so they've done some really, really interesting work in coming up with something, Jonathan, that you referred to, which is green domestic product, right? GRDP. And estimated, if we actually properly accounted for the cost of emissions and some pollution, what would Swiss GDP look like? And Jean-Pierre, you shared with me, it'd be about 3.5% lower than the actual figure. If we properly accounted for the cost of emissions, the cost of certain pollutants, some heavy metals and so on. But it doesn't at all include biodiversity loss, which is a really, really important one. It doesn't include a whole range of social factors that you might also want to consider. The good news is that that gap between GDP and green GDP has been shrinking somewhat. But that's, again, looking at it domestically. And, of course, it doesn't look at the global impact of Swiss customers and Swiss businesses. But it's a really interesting way of then not just looking at the performance of Switzerland's economy, but also comparing Switzerland's economy to those in other countries where that gap might, in fact, be widening. So this is one example of how we might go about doing this. So I hope I made the case why a measure at the economy level and the aggregate level that actually takes into consideration these externalities is important. Why is Switzerland a good place to lead this? So I'm not Swiss, but I'm very happy to live in Switzerland, and I'm learning so much about my adopted home. I came here 4.5 years ago. Many of you are visiting Switzerland, and I'm sure you're struck by some of the same things that continue to strike me. This is a very pragmatic country. It's a very pragmatic country. I find myself continuously thinking, somebody applied common sense to this. The fact that that is noteworthy tells you something about where some other places are. Switzerland is also a place that doesn't necessarily move first on issues or doesn't move very quickly, but when it moves with a whole lot of social cohesion and support. You don't get the kind of oscillation in policy that we're probably about to experience on this January 20th, where an incoming administration spends the first day trying to undo everything that the previous administration did. Switzerland does not work that way. When Switzerland moves, there's usually a lot of support. And lastly, Switzerland has this remarkable ability to think long-term. I shared this with our panelists in one of the pre-calls. I'm just astonished by this. Outside the train station in Lausanne, there's a sign informing people about a construction project, and it happily proclaims that the project will conclude in 2037. In most other places, there would be protests, riots outside a construction site for another 12 years. But here in Switzerland, people are really excited about, the long-term investment that we're making in the rails and the train station and making the country more livable. So I think Switzerland is a great place because of that pragmatism, because of that cohesion, because of that long-term orientation. But I think there's one other reason, and that is because I think initiatives like this are the way Switzerland likes to lead, not through proclamations or grand gestures, but lead by example. And with your support, I think we can move closer towards that. And given the importance of Switzerland in the world, as you demonstrated, Jonathan, I think this is a very worthwhile enterprise, and I'm so grateful for the opportunity to help kick it off at this event. Thank you very much. It is now my distinct pleasure to introduce 4 extraordinary leaders who will join me on stage for a panel discussion. Ana Fontcuberta y Moral is the president of EPFL, the institution I just mentioned, a role that she assumed on January 1st. She's a professor of material science, one of the world's leading scientists, and we're absolutely delighted to have her in this panel. Please come up, Ana. Ambassador Andrea Rauber-Sachser is the head of bilateral economic relations at the Swiss State Secretariat of Economic Cooperation, the SECO. Thank you so much for joining us as well. Why don't you go there, and then I can stay on this side right here. Fantastic. Stephanie Hart is Executive Vice President, Head of Operations at Nestlé. In that role, she oversees 80% of Nestlé's global purchasing and over 300 factories. Thank you very much for joining us. And Sandrine Dixon-Declève is the co-president of the Club of Rome. We're delighted to have you as well. Thank you so much for coming up. Stephanie, we have one microphone. This is the second one? Okay, very good. So I will give this one. Who was I going to start with? Sandrine. There you go. We'll start with you.
Okay.
So, Sandrine, you are involved, you have been involved in a number of these initiatives to think about, to take us beyond GDP. Mm-hmm. I'll sit down at some point. It's probably a little bit odd if I, but this way I can see you better. Okay. I'll sit down and just...
What I love is the fact that we have a panel of 4 incredible women.
I think that's amazing.
Thank you for that.
I think it's extraordinary.
This is how we move beyond GDP.
I completely agree. I completely agree.
Thank you, Jonathan.
So, what can you share with us about some of the initiatives that you've been involved in to better capture the social and environmental impact of economic activity and to align these indicators more?
Thank you for that question. So I am actually the former president of the Club of Rome, but still very much involved as both a global ambassador and honorary president. And also I'm the executive chair of Earth for All, which is an initiative very much built on the limits to growth. And what I would like to bring in is obviously 50 years of exchange between the Club of Rome's members and governments around how could we actually make the incredible speech of Bob Kennedy in 1968 a reality, which is we place a value on everything that actually is not of true value or does not matter. And I think we are in a place, as much as we're living in a very dystopian world right now, and let's be very honest, and thank you for your provocations and also yours as well. We have governments that are moving very much backwards and going back to GDP, anchoring everything in productivity at a time when we know that what we need to do is really move beyond. We have 5 countries that have shown that that's possible, the well-being economy governments, and they've anchored this in new indicators that are based on 3 core pillars. Environmental pillars with very clear criteria, as well as economic pillar, which has the GDP indicators built in, and then, of course, the social indicators. And so when you spoke about the necessary green GDP, I would just add that we have very much seen in these countries, but also in the work that we're now doing in the European Commission. There is a new proposal that I've been part of called GDP plus 3. There are other governments now that are looking at this GDP plus 3. By the way, there are about 1,000 indicators out there that continuously are being brought back. And what we're seeing is, at this time, when we're being told that we should go back to burn, baby, burn, This is actually where we can really create an alternative future for people, where we can give them the proper indicators to measure what matters to their lives. So we've got the indicators. We've got the new formulas of how to move forward. We have proposals in the OECD. The UN has just put forward a high-level panel. The European Commission is moving forward with its analysis. The trick now, and we've got the 5 governments, the trick now is for all of us as a community of leaders to really start to think about what does this mean for business. And I'm going to close with André's incredible book, which is The New Nature of Business, talks about, and as André so eloquently said at the DLD conference just this weekend, it talks about how you make money, not how you spend it. And that is the core. What is the new business model that will enable us to go beyond shareholder value and to think about an economy that services people, planet, and prosperity at the same time? We know what we need to do from an economic perspective. The question is, are businesses ready in working with governments to make it a reality? Thank you.
Thank you so much. You can pass it to Stephanie because you just said our business is ready. So our business is ready. So sustainability has long been central to Nestlé. And I know that you factor many of these considerations into the decisions that you make. Can you tell us a little bit of how that works, but then also what the value might be in having consistency across companies and industries and beginning to aggregate this at the country level?
No, thank you, David. And it's truly a pleasure and honor to be here representing Nestlé in this really, really dynamic discussion. And I know it's going to be dynamic because we had some conversations before. But, you know, truly from a Nestlé perspective, you know, we have been focused on creating shared value for decades. It is at the core of what we do and who we are. And we're so proud to be a Swiss company. And when we look at just the ability to go beyond GDP and look at the commonalities, because we take measures from, or at, I should say, at a country level and at a local level, because there are different challenges that we actually face in the 188 countries that we're represented around the world. And so it's not a one-size-fits-all approach, but one that's appropriate for each of those particular areas. But in the end, it is ensuring that there is a standard pool of data or information that organizations should be all equally monitored on, so that we can all understand how we're making an impact in the future of this world. And that's, you know, from a business perspective, what we're actually focused on. There's a tremendous amount of value and benefits to that when we look at greenhouse gas emissions, when we look at virgin plastic reductions, you know, again, depending on where you are in the world, whether or not there's infrastructure to support those types of activities or not, there may be different approaches, but having the ability to have a constant standard of measurement is extremely helpful to help us all understand how we can actually make an impact.
Thank you. Andrea, if we can turn to you, and we'll follow up. This is an opportunity for all of you to get some additional thoughts out there, and then we'll have more discussion and involve, of course, the audience in this as well. So we're hearing that the case is relatively strong. There are businesses like Nestlé that are that see a lot of value in the prospect of having some more consistency, of aggregating some of that. But that, of course, is where government then often plays a really important role, right? You can require certain data collection, data disclosure. How do you think about the government's role in mandating in an area such as this one more generally? Yeah.
Thanks very much, David. And also from my side, it's great to be here. It's great to look around the room, because I think a solution can only be found if everyone from different sides really sits together and has a concrete discussion. And the government, or the Swiss government, is of course excited to be part of that discussion, because we share the goals that everyone has mentioned, and SDGs and prosperity, sustainability, that should not be a contradiction. So I'm fully with you, and I think it's extremely important, and it's also important to underline this today, because the discussion has moved a little bit away from these topics, and what's happening today across the Atlantic will most likely influence that as well. Now, I'm coming with a bit of a spoiler alert, I'm sorry. It needs to be practical, and it needs to be easy. So from our side, we happily support that, but together with business and together with civil society. It should not be against each other, and so that means collecting this data must be as simple as possible. So we will not come and require another set of reports. We will not come and require a huge amount of audits, which are extremely costly and don't really make an impact. So I think that's the one thing. And the other thing, you mentioned that Switzerland is not always the fastest in decision making. And why is that? It's because we consult. It's because the government doesn't just move ahead and decide something. It's because we consult the different stakeholders. And I'm sure within this room, I mean, it was indicated at the beginning, we more or less shared the same goals, but not everyone does. So we have to create a certain mass before we move ahead. And I think that unfortunately will take some time, but we'd happily be part of that and make sure that we, all of us, join the lobbying for such goals. But it's something we cannot just implement tomorrow. Also because, from what I said before, it needs to be practical and it needs to be easy, and we have to prove that it does have an impact. So if these three issues are together, I think then we have a chance. Thanks very much.
Wonderful, thank you. And so last but not least, Anna, what excites me about this project is that yes, it is about business and government and civil society, but there's also an opportunity for research, for innovation to come into this, right? What do we focus on? What is most important to measure in a practical way? But also then, what are the most effective ways of bolstering resilience? So you just stepped into the role of leading one of the world's leading research institutions, very much anchored here in Switzerland, but with links globally with scholars from all around the world. What excites you about this project? Why is it important?
Thank you, David, and thank you for the invitation. I think we all grow up with GDP, and GDP is used to understand how rich is a country and the progress. It helps us understand where the country is going to be in a few years. That's very simple, and that's the beauty of GDP. Easy to understand, easy to predict. Now the world is changing very rapidly, and we have always been interconnected, but even more today. What happens in a country, either from social turmoil, from climate change, from climate disasters, affects the other in a very nonlinear way. And so we need to find ways how we make a prediction of the resilience of a country. And the resilience of a country goes beyond the current economy today. It's about alliances, it's about natural resources. And so it is important to really understand how we measure this. And from the research point of view, this is a very exciting question. And even more exciting because it has a direct link with what happens in the world. So there's a direct link to have an impact on all of us today. And so that's super exciting. Among the disciplines that we can contribute from EPFL, of course, we are not social scientists, so here we cannot contribute, but we have a big effort on data science and understanding the links between all that's happening. Data science has really big contributions to do, and together to work with the population, with the countries, with the government, and here I'm very excited to be able to contribute to this and to help out.
Fantastic. So we have, let's give her a hand of applause as well. Sorry. Sandrine, if you could. All right. So Sandrine, everybody is in favor. Everybody recognizes the importance. But one thing that is clearly coming out is this need for input, for alignment, for pragmatism. We cannot end up in a situation where the costs of measurement, of enforcement end up getting in the way of what we all want, right? Which is real meaningful progress and as a result of being able to make better decisions. So you said there's potentially up to 1,000 indicators. If you were to now give some advice to Swiss-based global businesses, Swiss government authorities, research institutions, where should they focus?
Yeah, I think that's why we've really tried to now narrow that down into +1 or +2 indicators, actually. We have to remember, first of all, that GDP came out of post-war Bretton Woods status, where we needed to produce in order to ensure that that production was going to enable our economies to grow, and therefore there was an assumption that trickle-down would happen. Now, what we're seeing, and this is very much to Anna's point, we're in a totally different landscape, geopolitically, resource dependency-wise, value chain-wise, etc. So how do we look at the benefits, not just the cost of shifting away from GDP? So let me give a few really anchored thoughts so that we can think about why this is so important at this time. The first is that, as Jonathan indicated, there is all of the biodiversity loss, environmental impacts that obviously need to be costed. You talked about the externalities. But let's be very clear. Today at 1.5, we've already lost 3% of GDP. So we are now at 1.5 degrees. We have surpassed our Paris goals. The average temperature is 1.5. This year, we are predicted to lose, globally, 3% of GDP. If we're at 3 degrees, we will lose upwards of 10 to 12% of GDP. So the first question is, can we continue? Are we smart as economists, and this is the dialogue I have with governments, to continue to measure GDP, beyond the fact that we know it's destroying the planet and it's not creating social equity? My plea to governments is, no, this is the opportunity to create resilience within our economies. If we're only measuring GDP, we're in a loss. So let's be smart and measure plus indicators so we can start to balance our economies. The 5 key countries that put in well-being economies during COVID were the most resilient. Let's also remember that ESG funds during COVID did the best. Why? Because they have built more resilience across their value chain. So we have enough data to demonstrate this is the right thing. But to Andrea's point, we need to be very clear. And this is the whole conversation that's live right now. I don't know how many of you know what's happening in terms of the omnibus legislation that's happening at the European level. It's all about optimization, simplification, but somehow it's been distorted to also be about deregulation and moving backwards. We need good regulation. We need good indicators that are sound. We have enough data and enough examples to show that we can do this. But I fully agree, we've gone into a spiral of translating data into over-reporting, which, by the way, has gone into the hands of the 5 key accounting companies who are making a friggin' fortune on the back of business. And business is absolutely right in saying this is not on. So I think we're really in a good place. We have enough proof points. But now we need to show how we can do it, and we've got those proof points to show how we can do it, working collectively with business to see how we now integrate this into our new business models, and working with governments to look at their balance sheet, to look at their accounting frameworks, to see how we can do it. And I know that there are enough people working on those indicators to simplify and to give them as much value and even better value than actual GDP.
Sorry, if I may add to that, it also needs to be reliable. You know, you need to prove that whatever you take, it is reliable and you can easily compare it. Because if you manage to get a kind of a competition among countries, then maybe you're on the way to success.
Very good. Do you want others to come in? Very Wonderful, because I so agree with you, Andrea. And I think that's the key. That is really what now the Commission is working on and the OECD. How can it be reliable? We need to remember that GDP also has sub-indicators. So, you know, there is a history of using different types of indicators. But you're absolutely right. And everyone has to move in a similar direction. The last point that I think is really important is the narrative development and bringing more people on the journey. What we have seen in the 5 key governments that actually went towards beyond GDP and well-being economies is they had an underbelly of citizen support and also of institutional, academic institutions, data support, et cetera, to be able to really build up a narrative of change that resonated.
So if I, just a short thing to add, I think it's important that as we evolve, it becomes an objective measure and it's communicated as so, and that people don't interpret it as being part of certain political views. I think we should stay away of that.
Yeah, that was actually kind of one of the areas I was going to lean into and really build on what Andrea said earlier, in the whole pragmatic approach and measuring what it's right. And, you know, in this digital age that we're in, data or accurate data is truly the new currency. And so ensuring that we're capturing the right information and have the ability to act on it is equally, if not even more critical.
Stephanie, I'd love for you to respond to what Sandrine said about the sort of burden of current efforts to capture some of that non-financial information. Sandrine, you said, you know, a lot of accounting firms are doing fabulously well, helping companies comply with reporting requirements that may not necessarily get us to where we are. And of course, you represent a business that operates globally, and there is a lot of competition, and we hear increasingly business leaders in Europe, maybe complain is too strong a word, but raise concerns about the cost. And I think it's hard for people to distinguish between what is a case for good
enough GDP to do it. But whenever you start such an initiative, it's against us because we cannot participate. It cannot be, we cannot afford it. And so they actually see such initiatives as something adversary. And that's really not the way to go, because they suffer just as much from climate change. They suffer just as much from social injustices. So we need to find a way to get at least some leaders on board and then hopefully move together.
I think you bring up a really good point, Andrea, and then I'd like to come to your reflection, Stephanie, because I also think you brought up some excellent points. The first point is we have to remember that the first countries on the front lines of climate change are the most vulnerable nations. And so we have to bring the narrative back to what does growth in the 21st century look like? Our growth in the 20th century was based on an extractive model, and also the pretext that actually social equity would grow with it. We're seeing that actually this is now increasingly decoupled, that growth for some is not enabling others. And in fact, there is a growing, very rich population across the global south and the global north. So absolutely, the global south needs to be in partnership. Lula has been working through the G20 on rethinking beyond GDP. And I think Lula is going to be a real champion on this, in the same way that also he's going to be championing on climate. And there's so many possible examples of where to start. For example, instead of the deforestation legislation that was planned at the European level, we should have talked about putting nature on the balance sheet in Brazil, enabling Brazil to then be actually a positive in terms of its economic development, because nature was fully included, including the Amazon, within its balance sheet. These are ways to already trigger the initial conversation. My question to you, Stephanie, would be, but then how do we enable long-term thinking within a business model that continues to be extractive and shareholder-driven? How do we have those conversations? You know, this was started by Paul Pullman at Unilever. This was also very much the ethos of the B Corps. What do we need to do now, especially as we're being pushed on the other side of the Atlantic to do totally the reverse? And we're seeing so many countries that are pulling out of their SBTI, of their pledges, companies. How do we, again, hack that negative narrative? Because there are so many companies in this room that are doing the right thing. How do we bring it back to that alternative future that is positive, which we're actually all part of?
Yeah, and I actually think it's really that last point, Sandrine, that you were talking about talking about there's numerous countries that are in this, companies in this room, many that are not in this room that are actively participating in this space. And it is the leadership of those organizations and the influence that we need to really have with our peer set or other people within the within our areas to be able to help to drive that change. It's I'm not going to say that it's completely easy. I'm fortunate enough to have been with an organization for as long as I have that actually believes and knows that this is an investment in our future. And when you realize the impact that this has on the global supply chain, depending on the categories that we're in, be it coffee, cocoa, it just takes a conversation with a farmer in a local market to understand the impact that we are all having on climate and climate change. It is a simple conversation that allows us to better understand how it impacts their income levels, how it impacts the prosperity of their villages. And so I think it's just all of our organizations continuing to be leaders in this particular space, to continue to share and talk about, what we're doing to demonstrate what we are doing and how we're contributing. Is it perfect? No. But there are significant progress that we're making in that space.
I find that excellent, Stephanie, because it seems to me this is now really a huge opportunity for the business sector to shape the conversation and to shape the model. Together, of course, with all the other stakeholders, but if from the business side you help how to shape it, you can also avoid some government regulations which are cumbersome, or I won't mention any supranational organizations which have adopted some very bureaucratic measures. If from the business sector you act and don't just react, I think then we have a real chance to move towards something that could actually work.
So one challenge in this space, and I mentioned my colleague Jean-Pierre Dantin, whom I spoke about this before, is the timeliness of data. So let me maybe frame this as an additional consideration and get your thoughts on this. And Anna, perhaps we can start with this. One of the reasons why GDP has this inertia is because we have developed over decades fairly sophisticated systems to measure and track GDP. And much of the other data that we might need in order to put that in perspective doesn't get collected with the benefit of these very sophisticated, often publicly funded systems. The data becomes available years later. The conversation has moved on. Governments have been reelected or not reelected based in part on incomplete data about the actual performance of their countries. So you mentioned, Anna, that one area where EPFL has real expertise is data science, new ways of capturing data. So I wonder if you could share some thoughts on this, on the actual sort of frontier of data collection. What are new ways of collecting data that increasingly are available, but also how you might partner them with others, and of course, particularly with government, to actually provide the kind of infrastructure for more rapid data collection that we would probably need if we wanted to make a real dent into GDP's dominance.
Thank you. So this brings me back to the role of universities. We are here to attract the talent that prepares us for the future. And both ETH Zurich and EPFL have attracted talent that has made are part of the data revolution. I think 10 years ago, we wouldn't know what to do with all the data that is available today. And it's thanks to this revolution in artificial intelligence that today we know what to do, and very rapidly. So as universities, we have infrastructure, so the Swiss Data Science Center. We also have the CSCS, which has all the computers, all the computing power to do something with that. And what we are here to provide the methods to help, once we have the data, collect the data, and also do something with the data that help us make decisions and help you also with the indicator. And about collecting data, I think today data is collected in many various ways. Every time we move, many companies know about it, what we do, why, etc.
We have no shortage of data.
No.
Sandrine, what are your thoughts on that?
So first, thank you for bringing up data. Let us remember that we've got a very growing part of the world that doesn't think evidence-based decision-making is significant or important. So I think it's really important to mark that and to remind ourselves that it's so fundamental to have evidence-based decision-making. And how can we close the feedback loops between the data development, the analysis that we get from our prominent universities across Europe and the rest of the world? I think that's key. Not only in terms of business data, but obviously the environmental and other analysis that we need. And that's where the other is, for me, so important. When we brought together the system dynamic model for Earth for All, and we looked at different scenarios to move beyond GDP, we were so struck by the social data, much more than the environmental data. And what we saw was that the social and environmental tipping points that were coming together, that culmination, the compound effect, was really the aha moment for myself and Johan Rockström, who are part of the co-authors of this book. Even Johan looked at me and said, oh my goodness, we're actually not going to meet the planetary boundaries if we don't deal with poverty and inequality first. One of the biggest holes that we have is better understanding social data and health data. And this is why I want to then come to your point, Stephanie, which is let's not make the perfect the enemy of the good. So let's be smart enough to have enough indicators to know that we need to move forward without killing ourselves. But let's also make sure that they're quite strong, and this comes back to your point, Andrea. It also means that we have to remind ourselves that several years ago, in 2020, when we were all here in Davos and we became the super spreaders of COVID, by the way, we have to remember that during the next 3 years, we had the greatest transformation we've ever seen before our eyes. We can transform, and it can sometimes be a bit messy, and it may have to be a bit messy, but we don't have a choice. So I think we have enough data. Now we need the willingness to come together, to simplify it, to work with business, to work with all parts of the economy and citizens through citizen assemblies to get more people on the journey. But we don't have a huge amount of time. And I think this is going to be a win-win. We cannot afford, all of us, to lose 12% of GDP. And we are moving towards a 3-degree world because we're already at 1.5. So let's hedge a guess that we get to 2 degrees in the next 10 to 20 years. That's already 7% loss of GDP.
You know, I think actually the availability of public data, that's not really the issue because, as you mentioned, we have environmental data, we have social data, we have a lot. The question is, what do you do with it? There is not really a monopoly of interpretation at the moment. I think that's an issue. And then, of course, you also have to agree on an action. I mean, the data alone doesn't help us. So, and that's why I thought what I meant initially with the kind of a competition between governments. If then you get to a point where you don't just want to have more GDP than others, but better resilience, then maybe you can trigger the action.
So I'd love to open it up to questions from the audience. We have a lot of folks in the room who've been working on these issues and have perspectives to share, and I'm sure have some questions. We have a couple of microphones in the room. Because we're streaming the session, we know some of you have a loud voice, but we still need you to use the microphone, please, so we capture it for the outside world. There's a question right behind you, and would you please just stand up so we can see you and briefly identify yourself? Thank you.
Sure. And 1, 2, 3. Yes, it works. Thank you very much for your leadership and invitation. My name is Helle Jorgensen, and I'm the CEO of Competent Boards and the author of a new book on the future boardroom and how to transform in turbulent times. I really like when you talked about being practical and pragmatic. More than 30 years ago, I worked on life cycle costs, how to price the externalities, both the positive and the negative. And it's not as easy as we think. I've worked on how do we get it into the balance sheet, the financial accounts, and our accounting rules do not really allow us to do that. So my question to you is, are you working with the IFRS, the EU in terms of that, but also the rating institutes like the Moody's of the world who are rating countries as how much can we actually lend to them, perhaps without looking at biodiversity and pollution, etc. Thank you.
Thanks. I always get past the microphone when they're difficult questions.
Sandrine, over to you.
And yet,
Well, you mentioned the accounting firms earlier. So.
I know, and yet we've got such a esteemed panel here. Good question, Hella. And yes, actually, I mean, we have to remember that, and I spent 2.5 years on the taxonomy. When we were going through the taxonomy process, we had the investment community in the room, we had the Moody's, we had the accounting firms, we had everyone. And we overdid it. I think most of us realize we overdid it. And so this is why I think this importance of understanding that simplification has to be linked with good regulation, not necessarily backtracking on regulation. It also means that we have to reduce the bureaucracy. So there have been several comments around Europe. And even though I speak to you in an American voice, I'm a proud European. I'm Belgian and French. I say this because the beauty of Europe, and if you look at the Draghi report and also the Letta report that have come out, is actually this is also the moment for Europe to reflect, if we're really going to build a European market, including Switzerland, how do we do that? How do we work together? And there are live conversations with Switzerland to see how we do that. How do we look at banking regulations in a way in which we start to promote this shift? How do we look at how much criteria is enough? And I really think that is the conversation that's live today. In this omnibus, in this idea of simplification, in working also with Emmanuel around double or single materiality, all of these conversations are so live that we have to bring everyone together now, today, and think through this, because it's key. There is enough intelligence, thoughtfulness, and deep willingness from Europeans today and many Americans who are feeling very much having a hard time dealing with today, as you were saying yourself, Stephanie. What are we going to see from the States is important, but how do we maintain our own competitive edge? Last 2 points, 98% of the European economy is small and medium-sized enterprises. So absolutely, we need to think about how we work with small and medium-sized enterprises and don't make an over-reporting aspect. But I think small and medium-sized enterprises wouldn't mind having a few social indicators to enable them to be actual better employers, because we're talking about companies upwards of 200, 1,000 employees. So this is the way to do it. We've got enough intelligence, we've got enough knowledge of how to move forward. It's difficult with the competitiveness element of thinking that actually we're not going to be able to compete in the global market. But I fundamentally believe, and I think in conversations also with President von der Leyen and others, commissioners, that there is a real deep desire to not go the American way, to not just produce, and not think about the cost, the long-term costs of production, and also to maintain the European welfare net and social indicators that we already have, and just build those bridges with environmental indicators in a smart way, which might mean doing things differently than we initially had thought.
And of course, we do have examples where when Europe has, I'm going to say something that might be a little controversial, when Europe has pragmatic regulation that is societally supported, it has global impact, right? I mean, the US decided we're not going to regulate on data privacy, and most large US companies comply with European data privacy rules because they operate globally, right? So it is important to get that right and make sure it's pragmatic and it works and it's societally supported. Let's get a couple of other questions. There's a gentleman right over there.
Jean-Pierre Rosa for Fox Ventures. I'd like to rebound on what you say for small and medium-sized enterprise. You know, the measurables that you have of success today, you've mentioned the GDP for companies, its valuation, the stock price, whatever. And I think what's really missing, and we'll be craving for that, is to have something like the net asset value an index that would be the net social value, whatever you can call it. And that the performance of companies are not only based on the NAV or the valuation, but also on their social progress as a whole. Is there anything in the pipeline? Because I can tell you lots of people are craving for that, we included.
Yeah, I love that question. I don't know if, André, you want to come in too? I think you're spot on. In our well-being index and also our social attention index, we're starting to move in that direction. I think that if you look at the way in which the 5 well-being economy countries went forward, they very much started to move in that direction as well. Working also with small and medium-sized enterprises to start to see what mattered to them and what kind of criteria could we then, what type of value would we start to place beyond GDP. I think the other point that we have to remember is Europe has a very long family tradition of small and medium-sized enterprises. And the family offices typically also, or family-driven enterprises, have more of a long-term thinking than a short-term thinking. So I think bringing all of this in and then having also with the larger companies a real conversation around shareholder value, quarterly reporting versus long-term reporting. What type of indicators are needed within that long-term reporting, which is exactly what some of the B Corps are very much doing, but also Danone, Nestle, and others who are starting to have those conversations, who've been really pushing for longer-term valuations and thinking through long-term reporting rather than quarterly reporting requirements. That in and of itself would already have a big shift in terms of the way in which businesses are engaging in a Beyond GDP agenda.
I think what exists today, for example, in Switzerland, we have the National Plan of Action on Business and Human Rights. So we kind of formulated some kind of an expectation on behavior, but we have no measure for that. That works more the opposite. If there is a complaint, we have a look at it. And it could be that the more this develops, and we also see that from civil society, that there is kind of an expectation that it can become a competitive edge if a company starts moving in that direction and applies such a measure by itself.
Hi, Andy Cher from SBM Advisors. Thank you for a fantastic discussion. I'd like to pull together just a couple of comments that I heard from this, and really it's about getting enough of the right data into the right hands to enable better decisions to be made. I grew up, as you can probably hear from my accent, not in Europe, but in South Africa, so representing the global South. But I have spent the last 15 years working in London and Switzerland. And I guess the question that I have is, it's easy to collect data when it's within your own company and you control that data and you know what's happening. But a lot of the real meaningful impacts are actually happening outside of the company's control in the supply chain and outside of Switzerland's borders. So these are happening actually mostly in the global South. So perhaps just some thoughts from the panel in how do we start to engage governments and suppliers within the supply chain from the global South to start to get more reliable data to make better decisions?
Yeah, no, Andy, thanks for the question and kind of the cumulative comments. Obviously, from a Nestle perspective, we are in the Deep South as well, and very proud to be there. When looking at data collection and going beyond just the information that we have inside the organization and looking at suppliers, other countries, communities that we operate in, you know, I think it's really easy to say and much harder to do in totality. You know, by being able to be actively engaged in local governments and countries, I can speak from a Nestle perspective. You know, we have lots of our leaders that are heavily engaged and active in those local communities and trying to understand and define what actually makes sense and how we can extract data from those local communities, which is why we actually collect information at the local level, because it's the only way that we can better understand how we're making an impact, again, when you aggregate all of the information. When we look at scope 3 and really working with our supplier base and understanding the impact that they're actually having from a sustainability perspective, I think that's one of the avenues that actually helps us standardize some of that information. But there's still a tremendous amount of work for us to do in that space.
If I may add to that, I'm just wondering, and maybe Anna can help us with that, whether the blockchain technology could help us to move a bit on something like that, because obviously we cannot expect a company to have a full control of their whole supply chain, but with something like the blockchain technology, you could perhaps add to some of the trustworthiness of the data.
Thank you. I think this is probably part of the solution. I'd also like to add that data is power today, and as such, people have a hard time sharing data. In the academic world, we've passed through that, and all the publications need to publish the data and the raw data. Would be wonderful if the academic world would also pass this, and it's been hard for scientists to share data as well, but I think if we would make this step, then things will be easier.
Can I just thank you for saying that? Could I just make one very quick comment? I think the biggest issue that we saw in the taxonomy was the fact that we didn't have a lot of the data that we needed, in particular coming from companies. So there was a real realization, again, in the discussions that we may go overboard because there just wasn't the capacity to report. And that's why it's so important, as we've all said here, to really understand what data do you have available, what do you really need for decision making, and then to start to see who then are the sources of that data. And I so agree with the point around data is power. If we look today, all of us who were a bit gutted with the Zuckerberg decision on Meta, and yet on the other hand, speaking to many people who have been following this, in particular communicators, who have said, really? I've been saying this to Zuckerberg forever. The best way to get data is to get it from the community. And Charmaine Love, who was here from Natura but is gone, we were just having a conversation around how they're tapping into, in the same way that you were saying, their employees on the ground who are actually sense-making the data. So there's both the data itself, but then there's the sense-making of the data and the on-the-ground data that in so many cases hasn't been, first of all, gathered properly, but secondly, seen as such a resource. We need to go out more and more towards the value chain, towards employees, towards citizens, to also get more of that sense-making and bringing in very new on-the-ground data as well.
We have time for one last question in the back there.
Thank you very much. And thank you very much, Jonathan and colleagues, for bringing this great initiative and crucial discussion to Davos. My name is Carol. I'm from SDSN, and we are a UN initiative. We have a lot of academic experience behind many of the SDG indicators with our SDG index and also with our World Happiness Index. There are many other indicators already available, and I really hope we can build on those indicators that are already available, because when I look at what is proposed now, it's very much a beginning, but we are much further already, I think. And also, I would really like to turn this discussion into more thinking about the narrative about how we can bring this knowledge really to action. It was indicated here and there, and I really think how bringing knowledge to impact is the essential question, and how can we build a convincing marketing framework around this initiative.
Thank you. So let me try to wrap this up. I won't do justice to the richness of the conversation, but I'm very excited about the panel and what it suggests about the path ahead. We've We've heard from leaders from civil society, business, government, and academia, and there's broad agreement that we must move beyond GDP, that we must equip decision makers, but also consumers and voters with better information, because we know they care, but currently there is just not enough actionable data for them to make decisions that put us on that path towards more sustainable long-term prosperity. We heard that there's a willingness to collaborate, not just a need for collaboration, but a willingness. We heard that business is looking to work with government, which is terrific, that Switzerland has a role to play. I really like the suggestion, Andrea, to find a counterpart in the Global South and to tag team on this. And of course, data is absolutely essential, and that is one way in which those of us in the world of academia are looking to contribute to this important conversation. And perhaps most importantly, we switched relatively quickly from the why to the how. And that's exactly where the conversation now is going to continue, leveraging all of the expertise here in the room. I believe, Knut, I'm turning it over to you. But before I do that, can you please all join me in a round of applause for a terrific panel? Thank you so much for your contribution.
On this note, I am just to not let you leave the stage before we were able to quickly take a picture. Sorry for this. And I'm going to take, of course, another slide. Sorry for that, too. So on this note, please, André and Jonathan, if you could join us on the stage. Thank you very much.
Do you want us to sit, or shall we just stand?
Stand, I think, yes. Sorry.
Stand up for it.
All right.
Very much.
I'd start dancing on stage. Thank you so much.
I hope you all enjoyed your lunch. Voila. It's a microphone over here. So, you might remember the 3 points I mentioned at the beginning of our program. So we first had the contextualization, setting really the scene of why we believe such an initiative to go beyond GDP is necessary, which was now followed by this panel. So my personal take on the panel, one of the things I most enjoyed was that it was an actual discussion, and all the 5 people on the panel really built on each other's points. It's great to have such conversations. And so next up, I'm very much pleased to welcome Knut Hannaes onto the stage. Meanwhile, I'm getting the right slide again. So, Knut, you are also a leader, but in strategy and sustainability. Your work focuses very much on strategy, sustainability, strategic renewal, and business models. Oops, I went a bit too far. And you're also one of the driving forces behind BS4CL, so the the Alliance of European Business Schools for Climate Leadership. Furthermore than this, you will be our, what I like to call, head table facilitator, so guiding us through this third part, which is really this, what we like to call consultative approach of really fostering this discussion with all of you on each of the tables. And I'm not going to say any more and hand over to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, so all of you, thank you so much for this opportunity. I was sitting here reflecting, listening to the panel, thinking about where we are. And I couldn't resist thinking back at myself 25 years ago. I made my first big presentation on sustainability. And I came into a room like this, and I remember I came in, and there were 2 people in the back, 1 person in the front, a man, and we were about to start, and I said, well, I guess it's not exactly what I expected, but should we just get started? And he said, go ahead, don't spend too much time, because I'm here to set up the room for after you. Can you imagine how much the world has changed? There's engagement, there's success stories, there's role modeling, there are examples. So from my perspective, we have come so far, and I think the panel exemplifies it. I know why I'm invited here, okay? I'm invited here because we're gonna work. And I think I'm invited here because I have this one. I have the nicest Swiss bell, which is, I think, what's gonna help us get through 2 discussions. Maybe you're now sitting here thinking, am I ever gonna get a break? And the answer is no, because we're gonna be discussing, but of course at the tables, you'll figure out how you work together. First, who are we here? We're 17 tables, and each table has a table lead who's going to facilitate the discussions, and I want to introduce them, okay? I want us to see who they are, and they will lead us through the discussions one by one. So please, as I read you up, stand up, okay, so we all see you. So the first one is Christoph Barman, who is the co-founder of Loico. Where are you? There you are, Chris. You can give a little applause. We have time for that. Second one, I see straight here, Thomas Berndt, professor in accounting in St. Gallen. Then we have Jean-Philippe Bonardi, who is, on my list here, it says Managing Director, Enterprise for Society, the collaboration. But in my book, he's also the former Dean of the Business School at the University of Lausanne. So, Jean-Philippe, there you are. Wonderful. Then you're well introduced, Andy, sure. You said it, so I don't need to repeat it, but you are a strategy and sustainability advisor in SPM Advisors. Did you stand up? You're too modest there. Wonderful. And then is Sasha. I don't see where you're. There you are, Sasha Cesar. And you are head of ESG research in Radicon Bank. And I'm happy you're here. Okay, and then Annabelle Cox, founder of LeadWise. Annabelle. I think we can give a little bit more applause. Huh? We're going to do something together, okay? And then we have Jean-Pierre Dantin, you were mentioned as well, Enterprise for Society and the University of Lausanne. Welcome. Wonderful. Each one of you is important here. And then it's Barbara Dubach, Executive Director of Innovate for Nature. Barbara, cool. Wonderful. Daniel Dubas, I don't see where you're sitting, but you are there. We met this morning. Federal Council Delegate for the 2030 Agenda. So we met last year on this 2030 Agenda. So we're moving on. It's good, yeah. And then we have Michel Jacquard, founder and partner of IDS. IDS, we can call it, a lawyer. So some people say accountants are going to save us. Some people say lawyers are going to save us. I think we need all kinds, right? We need you as well, of course. And then we have Hans Christian Mahler. You are the CEO of 1023 Health. Linda, you were there last year as well, which is great. Linda Manson, leadership coach of Leaderly. Good. Laura Perret, partner and director of Switzerland in Valpeo. Where are you? There you are. Great. Wonderful. Peter, no, you're all the way there. There you are. Peter Van Am, editorial director, leadership Fortune magazine. And of course, co-author with André Hoffmann on the new book, right? So I'm happy you're here as well. Then we have Klaus Benedikt Schönenberger. You are director of something super fancy at EPFL. It's called Essential Tech. Where are you? There you are. Okay, super. Wonderful. And then we have Patrick Semadeni. You are the CEO of Semadeni Industry Group. Where are you? There you are. Great to see you again. And then last, but of course not least, Fabian Waldmeier. You are the CEO of Fairtrade Max Havelaar. Where are you? There you are. Okay. So this is the lineup. We're going to have, as I said, 2 table discussions. And the way we will do it is we will make sure that everybody gets a voice at the table. So nobody monopolizes. You'll have time to be introduced. That will be the starting point. And I think what's important here is this is not a discussion where the conclusion is given. This is a discussion where we want to hear your real perspectives, okay? So open up, share your perspective. It's a safe space. We are, as most of the time in Davos, we're Chatham House rules, meaning that what you say won't be referenced back to you. So please feel this is an open discussion. I will, after each of the 2 discussions, be a little bit of a sports commentator. So I'm now Swiss and Norwegian, but back when I was only Norwegian, I didn't really know Davos as a meeting place. I knew it as a cross-country place. The best, so I'll be the cross-country sports commentator walking around talking to many of the table discussion facilitators, okay? And then we're 10 people at each table. So maybe we have half an hour on the first and then 20, 25 minutes on the second question. I think it means that we need to talk and listen. It means nobody should monopolize. And I think my wonderful colleague, George Kohlreiser, says it very well. Let's try to do it in 4 sentences. That way we can listen and talk and discuss all of us together. So that's the plan. Just so you know, as we get started, we will use this room to understand the sense of the room and to get ideas for the follow-up. You will see that the table facilitators, they will not only lead the discussion, they will also take notes on a small poster. We will collect them. We'll collect the impressions from the room as well, so that there's a real follow-up, and we'll discuss that afterwards too. That's important because everything can't be captured in me running around, but I'll capture as much as I can. All right? So here's the first question, and let's go straight to the tables. We deserve that discussion now. And the question is almost the obvious place for us to start. What are your thoughts on the problem statement? And what's going to happen is you'll be introduced, and then you'll read the problem statement, and then we'll get your perspectives at the table in the room. Okay? Was I clear? Jonathan, clear enough? Okay. So last thing, 5 minutes before we're out of time, I'll ring the bell once, just so you know, and then I'll stop us, get impressions, see the learning, read the room. All right? Have a wonderful discussion. Okay, so can anybody here remember when Iceland beat England in football in 2018? Can you remember that? It was like sensational. And the coach, you know what the coach of Iceland said? He said, I think we're winning because I don't really care so much what the players do when they have the ball. I care about what they do in the 95% of the time they don't have the ball. And that's what I felt in the room. You were listening to each other. It was not just, what am I going to say next? There was real discussion. So we're not going to stress this one. I want to understand the room now. And what I'll do is I'll start in the back, and then we'll work our way through table sharing. Let's make it real. So if you heard something that deserves being in the room, please share it, okay? Peter, I'm going to start with you, walk down, and then we're going to work our way through and make sure that we understand where we are. Peter.
I was kind of hoping I could use this microphone like a singer, but it's okay. It's all right. It's all right. We'll manage. So we had a wonderful discussion here. The good news is that we had a vast majority. Probably no Swiss referendum vote has ever had such a high majority as the yes vote on we agree with the problem statement. It wasn't 100%, but it was very close. However, we did also feel that the emphasis was slightly too much, perhaps, on the negative, and perhaps also more focused on environmental than on social and human. Those were two observations that we made. And we added to the problem statement by saying, you know, many of these negative externalities, in our view, in Switzerland, are outside of Switzerland. And that is a problem in itself, because it means that it's going to be harder when we get to the next question and ask what we can we do about it. As for solutions, well, you'll find about that later, because that's question 2. Yeah. Thank you.
Because we're not going to solutions yet. I know you got there, but you didn't finalize it. Thank you, Peter. Who wants to share with us on this side of the room? All the way? Can I come all the way here? You want to share? He doesn't have a choice, huh? But, yeah.
It's not like you're giving a big choice there, but no, we said several things. Overall, also very positive about the initiative, and lots of ideas about potentially for the next part of the discussion about how to make it work. One of the things that came out, if I try to summarize, is that we need to have not only measures of what is going on there, but also the journey. Right? And so how do we get there? And so there was actually some sort of a consensus that these numbers or these new metrics need to be actually leadership tools, right? Need to be convincing arguments for how to move forward. That's one thing. And as a result of that, because of the link to leadership, they needed to be sort of, or go with some sort of a narrative, right? About how it could happen and where the good incentives will be. Right, and then just one more point, a word of caution from the table, which was to say we need to stay very pragmatic when you do this exercise. If not, we're probably going to again, go over reinventing many things without probably much impact. And so, being pragmatic means probably already starting with what's existing, which means, for instance, complementing GDP is not a bad idea from this point of view, but also work in terms of really with companies, right? And companies today have incentives, there are costs that they will see with the data, and so we need to make sure in terms of pragmatism that we reconcile, right, business and the metrics that we work on. Thank you.
Super. Thank you very much. Thank you. Okay, so now we got 2 tables. They add to it. They kind of give more perspective to it. The journey, the narrative, word of caution. Let's not be over enthusiastic. Who now sits there thinking, I need to say something? Okay, so we need now the perspectives. Okay, and I'll make the cue because that's important. This is like a U.S. wedding. Speak now, or we need to hear you.
Okay, well, two things that are a bit different. First, there was a rather negative reaction to the negative tone of the statement. Yep. Same. But we really have to frame it in a positive way, and that requires thinking about what is well-being, what is prosperity, and do it in a way that is adapted to how the Swiss people sees it. And of course, there is a tension there, because if we think it is going to be less money, we need to convince people that it's going to be maybe more something else. And how do we do that? It's really not obvious. So that's the first thing, a bit negative view about the negative tone of the statement. The other one, it's clearly the view that when in this discussion, there are two levels. There is the macro level where you talk about GDP. And I think this is sort of well covered. We know where to go. But then there is the firm level. And what does it mean for firms at the company level? There's no GDP at the company level. There is a financial statement, and the tension probably there is even more. And here the view also, when we think about the company level, it's really big firms, was mentioned at the and SMEs. And SMEs have a specific problem where we would want to have simplicity, level playing field, meaning regulation, simple regulation. I think that it's ideally a single norm, but it's almost impossible to imagine, but at least go in that direction.
Okay, super. So I'm gonna continue in the room, walk around. Just wanted to see, yeah, here, come, yeah.
So thank you.
Cool.
Okay, so I think in addition to what has been said before, we didn't agree necessarily whether we should start such an initiative from Switzerland or whether it should be more a global thing. So I think we had really both voices at our table. One thing I really want to mention was really the topic of how do we make sure that the data is trusted? How can we connect the data to the citizens? And how can we also translate the data into emotions? So I think that's something which I took away from this table discussion, and how can we educate people in order to do so. So I think that's something we need to take into consideration. We talked about other things, but I want to leave some room for others as well. But I thought this was for me an important point.
And just a follow-up question. So just to kind of understand the table, between the kind of 100% positive, fully supportive, the other one, 0%, there are too many objections here. Where are you?
Well, we didn't vote in that. I think many. I would have said the majority said really yes, we should do something, and Switzerland is a good place to do so. Whereas some said, well, yeah, maybe there are already a lot of things, but we didn't vote, and I didn't count it.
Okay.
Yeah.
And it's not to be scientific, just to understand a little bit kind of where we're leaning. Yes. I'll stay here, and then I continue. I know. Oh, wow, you are. Yeah, we're coming, huh?
Okay, thank you. So at our table, we have a lot of discussion about definition. What is success? What is prosperity? Do we need grow or better than more? And what should we measure? And also that, in fact, we have a lot of information, so it's time to act and not to collect more data or indicators. If we do so, only 2 or 3 simple indicators. Also that Switzerland should be have a role model, but we need to think broader for other countries too. And the conclusion, I like the conclusion, from brain to the heart.
From brain to the heart, okay. From the head to the heart, okay, good. So this table, I don't need the follow-up question because I think we can more or less place you in a sense. I'll come here and then I continue. Linda.
Thanks. In addition to similar conversations to a lot of what we've heard, we spent a lot of time talking about the need to bring in other voices. We felt like the problem statement and even the initial development of this concept is done with people who are of a like mind. And we really need to have those contrary voices at the table contributing, people on opposite sides of the political spectrum, even people who are outside of our country feeling the impacts. So we felt the need to make sure that this was a more inclusive conversation than it feels like maybe it has been so far.
Yeah. Okay. Super. So positive, but let's make sure we're not in the bubble. Let's make sure it's a much broader discussion, right? Thank you. All right. Now you deserve it. You had the best arm stretch.
I made a big effort to get to the point where I can speak. So. No, but I want to thank my table. Excellent. There's many things that were mentioned already, but there was one that really did stick out for me, is the link between winning over communities, and this is what we need to do. Yep. But doing that will require that the businesses are involved. And there was a catch, because regulations tend to cascade down, or habits tend to cascade down the value chains to SMEs, who then find themselves scrambling and having to hire additional FTEs to be able to face the requirements of new things. So here again, a plea to make things simple. And there was also a mention about the fact that ESG is under attack, and how will this help us? And particularly if you saw the ruling in Texas recently, how can we use this to avoid, or let's say give a new dynamism to this? But generally the table was 71.2% positive.
I was going to say something around 70. That was in my... Thank you very much. I come here and I stay here as well. All right, this is good. Thank you.
Thank you. I just want to add one point we have discussed. It hasn't been mentioned so far. It's the question of the perspective. We found that maybe there is too much of a global north perspective in that indicator, because priorities in the global south are different. So the global outreach of this indicator might be somehow limited because of different priorities. And then we also found that the large companies, globally operating companies, have a lot of influence on what is being measured, what is being defined as well-being. So they are very powerful in setting standards as well. So the question is, what can this initiative move around the world? Will it be recognized, as it says in the definition of the CP? Can Switzerland take a lead in this with this indicator and achieve a global outreach or not? That's another point we wanted to add.
Okay, super. Thank you. Yes, absolutely, Fabian. Excuse me, sorry.
So yeah, on our table, I think there was also general agreement that yes, we need to go beyond GDP, and yes, we want to look at externalities in particular. We also had this conversation about the macro versus the micro level. So who is this for? Is it for governments? Is it for citizens to measure progress at a national level? Or is it for firms? Is it for companies? And especially if it is for SMEs, who are very dominant in our economy, how does it need to be done in order to be valuable for SMEs? Finally, we had one more conversation, which gives a little bit of nuance to the yes, of course, we need to go beyond GDP. And it's like, but why do we need a new initiative? Why don't we just join those 5 countries who have already embarked on a well-being agenda? Or why don't we build on somebody had a brochure of like, there is already a conceptualization of how to do that in Switzerland. And I think it would be important for this to be taken into account.
Super, thank you. Okay, we do 2 more, and then we're going to transition. But now we're getting a sense of the room. If you have something that needs to be said, say it after this, okay?
I think our table probably reflects a lot of the comments that were in here already. So we all agree that we need to go look beyond GDP, but we don't think that, politically speaking, that framing the problem in this way is useful. We don't think that beyond GDP says anything to the ordinary person. We think that the focus, the problem is communication. And we need communication which is positive, aspirational, incentive-based. And we don't need more data points. As was mentioned earlier, we have all of these data points already, and we don't think that collecting more data is going to speak to the finance community, to investors, or to the ordinary person.
Super. Thank you very much. So some of the same inspiration, not just fear here. You get the last one, I think, unless... Okay.
Thank you, Knut. So, yes, we all agree here that status quo is not acceptable. However, we struggled a little bit with the phrasing and the positioning of the problem statement. One thing that might help would be to think of it as a problem statement that should include or develop a theory of change. Because even if the initiative is successful, then we end up with a new index. But unless we do know what to do with that and to measure the impact and the success of this new index, it might not be worth starting with it in the first place. And in the theory of change, one of the outcomes would be to make sure that basically this index is usable for basically the beneficiaries. And there also the clarity issue, is it for government, is it for countries, is it for companies to deal with that? So theory of change missing.
Okay, super. Thank you very much. Anybody want to add something? Yeah, okay. Then you may get the last word. Let's see. I think at least we're getting a sense of the room, which is great. Sorry.
No.
Sorry. Who was? No, okay. Oh, you were not. I thought you were. Okay, so you're good. Okay. Anybody else? Anybody? We're good. Wow. Everything has been said. Everything has been said and done. Yeah.
Well, just perhaps a little addition. Also on our table, we discussed that good communication was lacking. We spoke about crafting a narrative, and it's just something that came in the aftermath was, and I like that incentive-based communication, but really, speaking about the positives or the incentives for the individual. We always kind of keep it high level. We speak about the economy, we speak about governments, but I think we need to bring it down to the individual. What's in it for me? Because I think a lot of people, they don't see what's in it for them individually or their family, and perhaps that is lacking.
Super. Thank you. Thank you. I'm looking around. 1, 2, 3. We're good. Thank you so much for the discussions and the playback as well from the tables. My reading is this: 71.3. The room is positively disposed, right? You're saying we need to frame this more as an inspiration, not just as a threat, building on fear, etc. We need to. It can't be just top down from a company perspective either. It needs to be. Maybe it needs to be bottom up from the SMEs. At least the SMEs need to be understood, respected. It needs to fit with their agenda, not just the big firms. And simple. I take that away. There are some really useful cautions here as well. Good input. I think we got a good sense. We can move. And now I'm going to do something which probably is going to make B-Lab a bit fed up at me, because we can't have a break. But what we can have is a 5-minute stand up, talk to your neighbor, move a little bit, and then we continue. But if we do that, can I trust you not to leave? Can I trust you to be ready in 7 minutes? Is that okay? 7 minutes, talk to your neighbor, okay? So, let's continue. And I cannot not tell you this story, even if a few of you were in our masterclass with B-Lab just before Christmas. But Hans Christian. So you are Hans Christian. And my best friend back in Norway, his name is Hans Christian. And he has this talent, which we need now. Because we have half an hour or so left, one important question to discuss. So what's important if we have this last discussion? Well, what's important is for us to be really present. We have to be here, now, in the moment, listening to each other, fully focused. And Hans Christian, the other Hans Christian, my friend, he is awesome. Are you good at being in the now, Hans Christian? Pretty good, 71.4%. Okay, so Hans Christian, my friend, he's always there. His mind is never somewhere else. He's not, the biggest lie of adults is nobody sees that I'm on my phone. But of course, we all see it. Kids are the best at seeing it. Anyway, he's always there. And a few years ago, he was the head of a big bank in the US, Nordic Bank, and he was traveling around seeing customers all over and being him, always there with them, etc. And to get around, he had this colleague who went with him everywhere. His name is Nils. And Nils is not like Hans Christian. Nils is more like me at the worst. always with a to-do list that's kind of keeping you focused on something else. In the evenings, calling back, I'm sorry to call you back so late. In the taxi, sitting like this, never really in the moment. So one day, this poor Niels said to Hans Christian, so unfair. I'm always so stressed. You're always so calm and in the moment. So my friend Hans Christian, he didn't get stressed by that, of course. Nothing stresses him. So he said, listen, Niels, have you ever listened to my voicemail? And Niels said, no, why? Listen to it. And then I listened to it. And it basically just says, hi, you reached Hans Christian. I'm traveling right now, so please call my good colleague, Niels. So now we need to be Hans Christian. Let Niels be Niels, okay? One last discussion. It's the one that's probably going to be the most valuable for us, because it's not just about whether, it's about the how. And the how, the way I think we can do the discussion a bit quicker. I want to walk around and get some specific ideas. How do we get started? And the one thing about getting started is we never start doing 100 things. We do 100 things, but not from day one, right? So how is really, how do we get started in what would you recommend CP does to get off to the best possible start? So it's better to focus on one or two things than long lists, okay? Clear enough? We are ready to do the discussion. Okay, Hans Christian, let's be Hans Christian, okay? All of us. About 20 minutes, and then I'll ring 5 minutes before. I wish you good, specific, clear, actionable discussions. So, Jonathan, we're going in for landing now, okay? When I walk around now, I don't really want your intellectual contribution. I don't really want your emotional contribution. I want to see your hands. What do we do, okay? And who wants to get us started? Sasha. Set the stage here. Actionable, clear. Yeah.
I try. So maybe a couple things. One was looking backward on existing measures, indexes, what hasn't worked, in a sense, trying to reflect on that, not trying to kind of make the same mistakes again. Also forward-looking, perhaps. An easy measure to actually act. I think that's the question in a sense. So one, not doing basically another index, and two, something on the question of purpose. Why are we doing this in a way to act and improve, right? Another key actions was actually to use platforms to spread the message, to gain other perspectives, have a pilot, and actually use the federal government perhaps as a pilot to implement this, how to measure, and also to kind of motivate the market, maybe adding that.
Pilot. Okay, super. So not do the same, Annabelle. Okay, thank you. And you're saying pilot. We'll find out. You'll find out where.
Well, thank you for the contributions of this group. We were reflecting especially on the Swissness. We were thinking about, does Swiss really help or maybe become a bottleneck in the process of scaling up? So perhaps reflecting on this one. We were also thinking to not starting from scratch, but taking into consideration of what's existing already. The index is existing already. And, perhaps just simply comparing it with the well-being economy and making this really, really soundproof, and then testing it on a small scale.
Okay, super. Testing on the small scale feels a bit similar to your kind of, let's test it out, okay? Okay, let's go. Maybe we can get all tables if we're quick.
All right, thank you very much. So, yeah, we had an interesting discussion as well. The first question was about the name. It's called the Swiss Impact and Prosperity Initiative, but now we're talking about indices, about an index. So the question is, should the outcome or the output be an index or something else, or something a larger initiative, which is not just about this new system? So that was the first discussion. We didn't necessarily agree on that, but I think it's important to really define that. Basically, the idea of going towards an index is widely accepted. We had some people around the table that thought it should be one number at the end. Other people maybe think it should be more like different numbers, which would make it a little bit easier for political steering within companies or within governments. But then the basic question at the beginning should be, how would this index be used? With what decision mechanism? And if we don't think about that, the index itself will probably not be very valuable. So this is basically the discussions we had. And then, I mean, there is a community, and what we really valued was also the fact that we have all these different constituencies and stakeholders on board, and they should remain on board until some kind of project is being implemented.
Super. Thank you very much. Thank you. So multiple stakeholders, keep them on board. Think about the name. Name is important. You know, when your name is Knut, like me, you know that name is important. Names matter. Okay, I'll go to the back.
Yeah, so we were mainly discussing the question how to get this off the ground, how to get it broadly supported. And we thought somebody at the earlier session brought up this idea of a theory of change. And we felt that was really good to think about what to do, what will it ultimately be for, that will guide us more on then, you know, where do we start and what do we measure, to build a strong narrative and really like a campaign about it, and then have a bit of a dual approach. Do some early testing, do some prototyping, do some piloting, ideally get a number of companies who would sign up to this initiative, ideally quite broad in terms of sectors, in terms of size of the companies, and then, you know, through several feedback loops, build the proposal further, and see that you can just get broader and broader adoption. So somehow making it factually. So you already have a number of companies doing it, having more companies reporting on a certain indicator that you can then aggregate, so that you really get that reach and more consensus on what will it be. So all of it about when does it reach a crystallization point from all the different data that is already available to sort of a consensus. This is what we're going to look at.
Okay. Super. Thank you. Go for it.
I was standing right next to the mic, sorry. So at our table, there was a very interesting idea to proceed like a startup. And a startup has a team and a vision, and we discussed a lot and has to take a first step. So really, it's not quite fake it until you make it, but really an encouragement to act. And another point was the team. The team is key in a startup, and we have the impression that the representativity is not good, because here we are Davos, there's a Davos crowd, and we should make sure that vulnerable communities are also involved. And in particular, we had these numbers. In Switzerland, there is 8% of people living under the Swiss poverty line and 15% of households. How do you win those people over and make them understand, or help them understand the value that they may perceive in this kind of initiative? And the second point was about the storytelling, which is particularly important exactly for those communities as well, because we have only one chance to convince them. And that's what we need to do. And the storytelling today was, in the words of one of the persons here, too wishy-washy. So we need to have something more engaging for the public.
Super. Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, I continue, Linda. I see you. I'm going to come back up here. Huh?
So, hot on the heels of what we just heard over there, we had a discussion about narrative as well, and the need to create a compelling narrative segmented by audience to bring people along. We had two super concrete suggestions. MacArthur has funded a study on polarization in Switzerland, and Our Common Home has done a study of values of the Swiss population across all types of population. Use those two things to feed into this segmented narrative so that it lands well with different audiences. The one other point that I haven't heard covered already was we have this very unique Swiss democracy here. Understand deeply how to leverage that and use that to the advantage of launching this initiative.
Thank you. Okay. Did you want? Yes, we're ready. You're ready. You're divided, but you're ready.
Yes, you're ready.
We'll explain that. So we get a very, very good discussion until the point that we realized that half of our table got coffee and the other did not. And then things get really off the rails. But in any case, it's not true. We suggested basically we have to come up with something simple, with something that can be compared internationally, and something that has a positive impact. Now, for those of you who've paid attention closely to the words, simple, international, positive impact, new definition for SIPI, you're welcome. And the symbol indicator to start with, number one, would be CO2. Then we were thinking, great, what's the next one? And that's when the whole coffee debacle happened. So we'll get to that in the next round. Thanks.
Super. Thank you, Peter. Thank you. Okay, I start moving up, back up. Yes.
Thank you. So in our group, we also would like to change the name, something regenerative, happiness, or positive future, something like that. Also, the education is really important to take into account. Then we also would like to have a political action, so we need to derive rules or new regulations from that perspective. And we don't need to be perfect at the beginning, so the conclusion is think big but start small.
Yeah, okay. So that resonates well with the...
You want to give it to me?
Yeah, I do. Here.
Thank you. Okay, so in our group, we first really ask the question, what's the goal and who is carrying it? So I think this should be something that should be also reframed or explained more in detail. We also said who is carrying it. It could be, in addition to B-Lab, also the BFS, which is the statistical office in Switzerland, but also SDSN or other actors. And I mean, like others have said, yeah, look what exists already. I think two other points I quickly want to mention. In line with the theory of change, we also said maybe we need a master business plan and maybe to look at a framework instead of indicators. So that was also one topic. And one idea was also B Corp has a lot of data from their members. Maybe we can use that data and build up on that data and come up with something. So just an additional idea.
Super. Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, I continue. I go here. Please.
Okay, so I'll give the floor to Benoit in a moment. I think first of all we started from the narrow thing, define. I mean, a new indicator, and the question was, okay, we said let's measure better. That's for sure. That certainly should be an aspect of it. But then, for what? What's the end goal? And the end goal is obviously to make better decisions. Okay, but what do we mean by better decisions? Well, then the idea was, well, we maximize well-being, go towards direction of sustainable development, and then came two ideas. One is we should have maybe a citizen campaign that is go to the broad public, because it's important to be aligned with what people think in Switzerland. What should be the goal? What is how do they define well-being? So there was one concrete way to go to the broad public, and there are different ways to do that in order to try to reach consensus on what should be the ultimate goal. What are we going to do with this better measurement? And then there is another initiative, and for that I give the floor to the initiator, which is Benoit.
So it's going to be very simple. So it's an invitation springtime, a group of 24 people led by E4S. In Valais, a 2 or 3 days workshop with people from representing the entire society, so all the stakeholders, and the output and the methodology will be to use the theory of change, and the output will be to define what is success, a new narrative, and a very pragmatic action plan. So it means that in 2 months you have a plan for the next steps till the end of the year. I have seen the paper of Jonathan. You need to be ready beginning of 26. So this is the plan, and maybe we can organize a vote to make it. No, but we need to act quick. It has been said, it's an entrepreneurial journey. We need to lead it as a startup. It's a startup, and it's urgent.
Thank you very much. Maybe an applause. Okay.
said that she would be ready to facilitate.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good. Thank you.
I just wanted to thank you all for, first of all, for this incredible lunch. And it's so heartening when you're working in the daily grind of trying to figure out how best to do this, to hear all your inputs. The only thing that I would ask is, and this is exactly what I said to Jonathan, is there is a group of people who are really working on this, a community of champions. And so let's make sure that we link up that community, because Switzerland is part now of a broadening community, including those 5 well-being economy governments. And there's a lot of learning from there. So before starting, there's the possibility of learning. Also on our Club of Rome website, there's several papers, learnings from the 5 economies, also how to put in place a well-being economy. And these are just guidances, but I think are really good before starting the journey. There is a big forum, the Wellbeing Economy and Beyond GDP Forum, that will be organized by Iceland in May, where we are actually co-organizers, where governments will be coming in different communities as well. So I would also invite you to, and if you're interested, to come to that as well. So just not starting from scratch, lots of things that are out there. So great to see the enthusiasm and the willingness, and let's do it.
Let's do it. Okay, super. Thank you. I think, yes, André.
Sorry. I think that for me, and I'm not sure the table will support me when I say that, but I will. You know, we are talking about well-being. We're talking about humans. We're talking about human welfare. We're talking about people being happy. And there we are coming again with a metric, with a piece of paper, with a number. I think if the CP wants to be successful, it needs to immediately go where it really matters, launching this conversation. Why do we need a change? Yes, you are not happy at the moment. Yes, the current status quo is not working the way it should. That is a legitimate conversation to have. If you want to bring well-being forward, we're going to have to put aside all these ideas, all these 150 years of thinking in terms of metrics and linearity and growth and no, it's about people, and people who just what they want is to be happy. And if we can touch that particular thing, the CP will certainly have legitimacy. We need to start this conversation, and I think that's one reason why I support this.
Super. Thank you, André. Thank you. So I'm going to invite, look at Jonathan. Now he's kind of no jacket, shirt up. He's ready now. You're ready.
Can you hear me?
I'm going to say one thing, and I'm going to ask you a question.
Sure.
So the thing I'm going to say is, table facilitators, please keep and share what came out of the discussions. Okay, that's valuable. And we agreed also, special comments, ideas that came up, please share them with us so that we can build on them. And now, question to Jonathan. The question not to ask is, did we have the right discussion? Because imagine if he says no, we don't have time to redo it. So my question is, of course, what did we learn from this?
Okay, lot to unpack, but what I hear is we want to move from words to action, right? It's what I hear from all the table. Yes, we've done the pre-launch today. We are starting this initiative, but we already made some homework before. So connecting the dots with existing initiative, identifying the gaps. But really what we can pull from you is how to be smarter, how to go quicker. And this will happen only if we get on the journey together, right? Those are simple words. So let's make from this moment really a movement spirit. So that's one first thing. Really love this idea of bridging with citizen, consumer, communities that are affected directly by those interpretation of numbers. So let's get now at speed. And so before I'm answering fully the question and meaningful of the time, because we have to leave the room in 4 minutes to be on time. Stephanie, intern team.
It's not 4 sentences, it's 4 minutes. That's a lot.
No, we had a dense, long consultation process. Thanks for all of you. Coffee helps, I heard. No, I'd like to thank you, Knut. Fabulous name. Made me think about a beer. I said, no, a beer, no? So I don't know. No, fantastic. Thank you. A big applause for Knut, please.
And thanks for, yeah. Partner in crime, definitely. We've been doing a lot of things with IMD, obviously, thanks being so supportive. So I need to wrap up. And there is so much to unpack, right? What I want just to do now is back to your comment and ideas, is that yes, today's event mark the start of this Swiss Impact and Prosperity Initiative consultation process. And this means that we have already some ideas how to phase that, or to stage those things. And more than just phase one, going on, finalizing a consortium, I'm super pleased to announce that we already have 32 partners that reach us and say, whatever is going out, we want to be on board. We want to be with you. We want to be part of it, and we want to be voiced on those outcomes. Might be delivering a specific index, might be delivering a specific set of collaboration, could be designing some solution, could be identifying some pilot programs that are already in motion. Could be a lot of things. You will have voice, the consortium will have voice to decide strategically how we move forward, but we need you on board. So that's the call to action today. Obviously, developing piloting stage 2025. We will pilot already this year, in the next quarter. So end of Q1, we want to finalize the consortium and then start piloting. Could be region-based, could be city-based, I hear you, could be topic matters-based, could be on a sector-specific. We already have a lot of inquiries about that, and we need definitely in this phase to connect the dots and the gaps with other EU international initiatives. That will be our work as a coordinating body. So don't want to go too much on this, but we will deploy a framework. So yes, a framework will be designed. We have already a lot of information available and ideas that we will combine with the input of today. And what I want to mention is here is a moment to scan the QR code. Here is a moment to capture more precisely what are, from your point of view, the sectors or the topic to focus on. And please read the sectors and the cross-enabler with two different lenses. There is sectors that matters and that we need to focus on, and there is what we call cross-enablers, like financial services, or retail, or what we call cross-enablers. Select on the QR code, fulfill the survey, and this is the call. Whether you are an academic, a researcher, a company, an SMEs, a tour leader, an NGO, government representative, step in. Contact us, we will follow up. Obviously, we will have mail thread happening because we need all forces to join this initiative and this movement. And so I want to be short. We're already behind the time. I'm sorry for that. So what I want to hand here, because it has been mentioned quite often, it's the quote from Bob Kennedy around, GDP measure everything except that which is worthwhile. And that's where we should really get the inspiration. We need to go beyond traditional financial economic metrics because life is much more important than just an accounting report, right? As it's done today. So we need to extend it. So yeah, and Herlef, thanks you to everyone involved today. As we act together to build this positive vehicle for change, please stay tuned, connect. Thanks to the live stream community that have joined us. I heard a number of hundreds of people online. We receive lots of comments and questions also online. We will try to address them because this is the openness of such initiative. I thank you very much. I wish you a good week for the ones that are staying in Davos, a good and safe trip back for the ones that are going back to their region or cities. And then, yeah, I'm delighted to move forward and continue with all of you on this basic moment forward, right? Please keep this. This is a moment that led a movement. So you are part of it. Be proud, be active, and we stay in touch. Thank you very much.